Well, thank you all very much for taking this evening's, taking some time off this evening. It's not the most exciting entertainment, but one which I think is important to us all, about the political and moral and personal choices that are involved in policy on unemployment and welfare. These are strangely issues which are not much contested in English politics, but which quite literally affect millions of people and their families very strongly. Laurie has kindly mentioned that I'm a fellow of the Institute of Employability Professionals. I started my career in employment advice in the 1980s with the Youth Opportunities Programme, and have worked around mainly Eastern Europe, helping countries develop their policies as they left the Soviet Union, and now recently actually been appointed to head the Institute Centre for Employability Excellence. I don't pretend to be an academic, although I have a really rather anorak way of reading all the research papers. I do pretend to be a fierce critic of this country's failures in helping people out of poverty using unemployment policy as one of their tools. So if I can make this work, there we are. Let's just quickly go back to basics and remember why we have policies to help unemployed people. It's always important in this field of work to start with the basic principle, because that will inform every action that follows. Unemployment makes people poor. Poverty makes them ill. Widespread unemployment magnifies social differences in the worst possible way, and some social commentators believe that it also increases criminality. That's established and researched fact. Unemployment also leads to delays in matching people to jobs, because when your car breaks down and you're unemployed, you can't afford to repair it, so you can't go to the interview and the bus doesn't turn up on time. It leads to a diminution of personal skills and confidence. It leads to a reduction in people's ability to search for work. Becomes more difficult as your confidence declines, and it increases the relative disadvantage of poor people from relatively well-off people. So it's not actually the best thing in the world, is it, unemployment? Even though economists love it, because it's supposed to depress wages and be part of a market system. In the UK, the response is job matching services from the Public Employment Service, Job Centre to you and me, don't we love them? Job search support from private sector contractors to government, vocational training in colleges, provision of welfare benefits to mitigate some of the effects I've mentioned, and along with the welfare benefits, conditions on getting your money, sanctions if you don't cooperate, and a rapid removal of welfare if you're lucky enough to get into work. And I've alluded to, I'm going to gallop through this fairly quickly because we don't have much time, but again, let's work from basics. Why pay people who are unemployed? You do it so that they keep their employability levels up. They don't fall into the slough of despond, and their car, when broken down, can at least be replaced with the price of a bus ticket. Their health should not decline so much. Their confidence should be maintained, and with it, their effort. So this is action against poverty. It's action which protects families and children from poverty, and it has a limiting but because it's not much money, rather weak effect on maintaining the mental health of the population. But money isn't enough. In about 1905, it might have been 1906, the labour exchange was set up to help people with finding work and matching them to jobs and competing between each other for the jobs that are going. Notice, of course, that the labour exchange, it wasn't employers who queued outside, it was the unemployed. Now, more than 100 years later, the narrative around unemployment has changed. Tories and the Tory papers would have us believe that paying welfare benefits to unemployed people has the moral hazard that they might prefer the benefits to going to work. And there's so many instances of this that I hope I don't need to dwell too much on it. And on your screen, you can see a quote from a solicitor who had to take a case against the Department of Work and Pensions because somebody who was being harassed by them committed suicide. The consequence of the moral judgment of governments, politicians, and newspapers reaches unto death. Within the large number of unemployed people, we tend to think that there are deserving people that we ought to help. We tend to think there are undeserving people who are just work-shy layabouts, or at least that's what we're told. Whether it's true or not, I'm going to ask you a question in a moment. And we ignore the undeserving rich who nonetheless get tax breaks. The Tory message is clearly that taxing the rich disincentivises them. And as I'm going to show you, they believe that poverty incentivizes people to go to work. I'm here to tell you the research evidence tells you they are wrong. And here are just some quotes from newspapers about the kind of narrative and how it gets put about. And you might be interested, I'm not sure if you are, to compare how much you get on benefit as to how much you get if you're a paid up member of the judiciary for making moral and political and financial judgments against people alleged to be scroungers. This really is about grossly unfair systems. Even if there are some scroungers, are they confined to the unemployed? I don't think so. So what I'm putting to you is that there are two different and competing moral views that we take when we think about welfare and employment services. The first is that benefits encourage idleness. It's too expensive. You're wasting your time helping people who will go to work on their own, and you're wasting your time helping people who won't go to work anyway. Poverty is the way to drive people into work. Employers should be free to do whatever they flipping well want. That's the view which says we've got a welfare state because we're a rich country. Oh, and by the way, it's much too expensive and we ought to minimize the cost. The other view, and there is a great deal of research evidence to support this view, is that poverty is economically inefficient. It's bad for the entire country and its wealth. It causes ill health. Ill health increases unemployment. Fit people live longer and they are more productive. That increases the economy, which increases taxation, which pays for the employability and health services which help people avoid poverty. That's the view, that we're rich because we've got a welfare state. And I think that is a fundamental difference that Labour must embrace and publish between its view and the Tory view. So here's a question for you. Unmute your microphones if you'd like to answer with a single word. If claimants don't cooperate with unemployment programs, should we, score 0, use all the sanctions possible? Or do you think it might take them a bit longer to find work, but it doesn't matter much? Number 5. Or do you think, no, they're human beings, they've got a right to make their own choices? Number 9. What score would you give?
Far away, people.
It's difficult, isn't it? I'd say 7.
Okay. 7's the kind of score you get when you ask professional employment advisors this question.
I want to say 9.
Yes. Yeah, so do I. As it happens, because of the second part of that, which is as long as they face the consequences.
But
If
you
it's
don't.
an informed and understood choice, why should anyone interfere with their rights to choose? But some people find it hard to understand all the consequences. You can go on thinking about this because I do need to gallop on. I'm running so fast that I hope my feet are not sinking into the snow. Linda.
I went for 7 as well, as before Jeanette said it. So
yeah, great. There'll be other questions. So keep the brains on functioning mode, please, not on pause. Now, actually, there are 2 kinds of policies that governments can follow in helping people go to work. One are called activation policies, and they're things like requiring them to go to the job centre, requiring them to prove that they've applied for work and so forth. And the other is taxation and removal of benefits. I've put on there a graph which shows that the United Kingdom is in the upper half of high taxes and high demands on unemployed people. And you've got Luxembourg and Slovenia up there who are a bit off the scale, but look at the Czech Republic, way down on the left-hand side at the bottom. Countries can and do make choices, and they can be really different from one another. So Britain, on the whole, we use plenty of stick and very little carrot to try and help people into work. The other thing is that welfare rules combine with personal taxation to create a situation in which if you go to work, you get taxed more than a multi-millionaire. And if you're in work, as this graph shows, if you increase your working hours from part-time to full-time, the effective tax rate can reach 75 pence in the pound. So you go to work and you say, well, I've got a 20-hour-a-week job. Great, I'm going to work 40 hours. That's going to double my income, isn't it? No. You're going to take home 25 pence in the pound that you earn extra. That does not look like a labour market or a tax regime that will encourage people to work more and to work longer, to pay more taxes, oddly enough. It has a negative effect on people. And again, I want to say to you, there are other countries that do it differently. This is a moral choice by the governing party of the time. And believe me, it was, if anything, worse in the 1990s and early 2000s. The Czech Republic takes less than 15% off when people go up to full-time work. Go to Poland, it's a paltry 40%. The United Kingdom, as we saw, 75%. Across the whole of Europe, with few exceptions, taxes on low-paid people are extremely high. And we worry about the cost of living. These are moral, political choices. So, another two questions for you. First question, how much would you pay in unemployment benefit? Would it be nothing? Poverty makes people find work, and of course it reduces wages, so it's great for the economy. Or would it be pretty much close to what people were earning before they were unemployed, so they can go on living, look after families, and actively look for work and pay for train fares and petrol to get to interviews and the like?
This is Lisa. I'd say 9.
I do like the 9s, as you might have guessed.
Are you asking what would be a realistic view, or as opposed to what ideally one would like?
I'm asking you what you would do in government.
Depends how much money you've got.
Does it? Does it? Who says? It's a moral choice how you spend the money you've got.
Once again, I think I'd go between 7 and 8.
7 and 8, yeah.
I think I can't get away from the realistic view, 6.
6, okay. Well, that's still a lot more generous than the current government. Yes. Yeah. Let's look at
I'm glad I'm differentiated from the present government, anyway.
but not any different from the last Labour government. But the current government isn't. Second question, so if you're in government, which means you've got the power to decide, and you look at the tax rates and the taper rate, it's called, how quickly people have benefits taken away from them when they start to earn money, where would you set the rate? Would you set it where it is now, roughly 75, up to 75% of wages? Or would you say, no, we're not going to take any tax until people are earning the average, and we'll shift all that to the people who earn more? Or somewhere in between?
40%.
40, okay.
I would have said 1 and 2.
Yeah.
As a being in line with as an incentive. I'm still reeling from those weird figures about how it's the Scandinavian countries that are the most sort of draconian, apparently. In this
Interesting, isn't it?
Yes.
Which means that I mean, absolutely right. They look very draconian on this analysis, but there are other aspects, like they do pay welfare for very much longer than we do. Yeah, I have simplified this to focus on, I think, the major issues. So there are some things to think about. Political choices. Now I want to turn to the question of disadvantage. Some people are clearly disadvantaged compared to others in the labour market. And my definition of disadvantage is that you're not able to join a fair competition for work that suits you. Okay, so that's all it is. It's just something about the situation is unfair on you as a person. There are two kinds of disadvantage. Social reasons, like there aren't any jobs in your area, or there's prejudice against you, or there's privilege for other people, which is not warranted by your economic performance. And circumstances like it's a rubbish bus service around here and you can't get to the job. I mean, bus doesn't turn up on time, or you live in awful housing and it's miserable. Well, you've got a family. How about that? So those are reasons why people get disadvantaged, no fault of their own or anyone else wrong. Plenty of faults, but not to the individual. Individuals also have certain disadvantages. For example, the classic one is that they have some disability, but that might just be a lack of ability, that in fact they are unskilled for a particular opportunity or a range of opportunities. They may have commitments like family. They may have personal wishes, like you really don't want to go and walk 10 miles a day in an Amazon warehouse on the outskirts of town because the pay is rubbish and your chances of being there in 6 weeks' time are pretty small, and it would make you miserable. According to DWP Job Centre policy, that isn't a disadvantage, but actually in real terms, it is. It minimises your access to the labour market. Now, current policy focuses entirely on the person and not at all on society at large. Does it work? Well, last Labour government introduced the Disability Discrimination Act, and since then there's been very slow progress in the number of disabled people going into work. That's the green line. The yellowish coloured line is non-disabled people. So you can see it bobs up and down a tiny bit. So some slow progress working for disabled people since the Disability Discrimination Act. Less progress and still substantial differences between ethnic groups. These are social reasons for disadvantage. I won't try and describe the details. It's not my field, but it's perfectly plain that prejudice is having an effect. Even government official sources admit that. Another kind of disadvantage is where you live. And there is a 20 percentage points difference in the rate of unemployment between different places in the country. Now, actually, if you live up in Glasgow, it's not your fault, but it sure is tough if you're looking for work because the claimant rate is likely to be 25 or 30%. That's a different kind of disadvantage. Now, if you're going to help people, sorry about rushing through this. How am I doing for time, Rory?
No, you're good.
Good, okay. If you're going to help people, it matters who you choose to help. And let us imagine for a moment the government's got a fantastic scheme and it's going to help the most needy people. That sounds like a good thing. People with disabilities, yep, they get priority. People from ethnic minorities sometimes get priority, depends where you are in the country. More services are available in Glasgow than there are in the home counties. Good thing, just what you'd want. But one of the main ways that government suggests you join a program to help you into work is by how long you've been out of work. And on this graph, the blue line at the top shows you the number of people who are leaving universal credit after at least a year unemployed. Just look at the blue line at the top. You can see that over the last 3 years, roughly, moving with the state of the economy, something between 45 and 30, 25% of people leave credit welfare, they leave universal credit after at least a year of unemployment. But if you go on a government program and have a look at the thick dark blue line that wiggles across all the other ones, that's the number of people who went onto a government program and got a job. It's way down. You might as well have sat unemployed for 3 or 4 years as go on a government program in the second year of your unemployment. You might as well have waited rather than getting this help, is what that tells me. I can see frowns and concentration. Anyone, my email will be at the end of this. Anyone who wants copies of this and the graphs and the background data, more than happy to share it and the original statistical sources, and you can see it and think about it at your leisure. Here's another way of cutting the same data. These colored lines show the number of people who were unemployed a year ago, but are not now unemployed. And I've divided them up by how long it took them to get work. So the top line is the people who've been unemployed at least a year and up to 2 years. And roughly speaking, 80% of those get work. So remember what we said before about all those scroungers? 80% of all people who are unemployed for a year, at least, get a job before the second year is up. Nearly everybody who can work does work. Work is popular. It's the poor, different people with personal difficulties and all sorts of adverse circumstances down at the bottom in the pale blue grey line who've been unemployed for at least 4 years, maybe as much as 5 years. And they go to work at the rate that varies between roughly 60% each year and 30%. So even the long-term unemployed go to work. You know, it's not the end of the world. It's horrible. It makes you poor. It makes you ill. It makes you unhappy and miserable. But many of them go to work. And if we look at the outcomes from work and health program clients, the average is the thick blue line just above 20%. So it's not looking good for the work and health program record, is it? No matter how you cut the data, government programs aren't working as well as they should. They seem to be trying to do the right thing, but they're not very successful. The other thing for Labour to remember is that it's the labour market that makes the difference. Those big peaks and troughs in the graph reflect perfectly the situation in the labour market at large. It's not the individual, it's not the person on welfare who's affecting how many people get jobs, it's the state of the labour market. How many jobs are there? This is beginning to look a bit more complicated than we thought, isn't it? Just if you want a headline, if you've been unemployed for 3 years or more, your chances of getting to work were more or less the same whether or not you went on the government's work and health program. More or less the same. That's a bit like saying you wait 3 years to go to hospital, but actually it's only a 50-50 chance of being cured when you get there. If this was health, there'd be a revolution.
Dave, can I just ask a question? Is there something about who goes on the work and health programme? Are they people with, do you have to be finding it particularly difficult or have a particular disability to go on one of these programmes?
There are three parts to it, and I've been looking at the part which is reserved for compulsory entrance for long-term unemployed people. Long-term means over 2 years. There's another section which was about disabled people who could go voluntarily early on. And there was a third section which has immediately left my mind. But it was I think it was lone parents could get on the programme. I've excluded those last two, the lone parents and disability, from these figures, because A, it's voluntary, and B, they're a special group with many other factors affecting the figures. It becomes rather complicated. And the program's ended. The reason I chose it is because we've got a long run of statistics. The new programs which have replaced it are too new to have any reliable figures. They may be better, they may be worse. So I'm going to move on rapidly and just mention, okay, let's look now at current government policy on unemployment and disadvantage, and remember some of those things which we talked about before about disadvantage. Does current policy do anything about prejudice against people? No, it doesn't. Does it do anything about the privilege afforded to certain people? I'm one of them because I went to one of the big universities. You know, it's helped me throughout my life. I've got a privilege. Has the government ever done anything about that? No, it doesn't. Does it do anything about the class circumstances? The fact that if you're the son of a bricklayer, your chances of becoming a doctor are pretty flipping minimal. No. There is a fiction, and it is a fiction, that equality of opportunity leads to equality. It doesn't. And James Bloodworth, who wrote a book which I can recommend to you, I think it's, you'll have to get in touch if you want the title, it's again gone, which was all about how opportunity is not the same as equality. Tax policy, as we've just seen, is designed to disincentivize poor people, to keep them ill, miserable, and hungry. But when we look at personal needs, suddenly there's a whole raft of policies, and some of them are actually pretty good. Access to work is a really good way of helping disabled people get jobs and hold down jobs. It's super. It's got a huge waiting list, but the fundamental principles are good and they're being copied all over Europe. Other programs like the work and health program that I mentioned, I think not so clever. But actually, when you look at this, isn't the government blaming the unemployed by saying, you're the problem, you're the people we're going to work on, we're going to ignore everything else? I think Labour should do better. What could it do? What could Labour do? Labour could get rid of or contribute to the slow eradication, let's be honest about this, it would be slow, of prejudice by insisting on democracy in the party, democracy in the country, and the removal of political elites, or at least their exposure, because they are the flag wavers, they are the standard bearers of prejudice. If I say two words, you will understand my meaning. Boris and Johnson. They could work against corruption, lobbyists, elites, tax loopholes, and giving it away to the rich. because that is the development and the continuation of privilege. And for poor people who are unemployed, I believe that a visible work of that kind would be a great encouragement to them. And that's just the start. Labour is a political party. These things are within the grasp and the duties of political parties. They could work on class circumstances, recognising that the people who empty my bins actually are talented, skillful, mainly young men, not all of them, who do an immensely valuable service to society. They could enhance fair working practices, and they could go back to something which I remember from the 1980s when I started my career in unemployment programs. I worked in the north then. Labour had an industrial location policy to move jobs from wealthy, low unemployment areas to the areas where work was needed, where the pits had shut, where shipbuilding had been closed. Yeah, there was an industrial policy. Let's hear it. And let's have a look at the council houses that are needed for people who live on welfare in grotty flats, in high-rise blocks, in desperately poor suburbs of cities with awful transport systems. And then the question, okay, so you may make some small changes. How are we going to make it different when you're in work? And the answers are straightforward. Trade unions are the people who make work acceptable, reasonable, worth doing. Good employers cooperate with them. Germany has a system of trades and workplace councils that works extremely well, and that is an efficient and respected economy. It's not even particularly left-wing. Tax and welfare policy desperately needs reform. There should be effective, targeted disability and employment and health programs, and the elimination of the desperately cruel sanctions regime that this government espouses and promotes. Labour can do important things that will have an important effect, even though it will take time. And what works? Well, we know what works. The evidence is there when you're helping people. So when you've got all that other stuff right, and you say, yeah, but people still need help. To help people into work, you have to build their confidence and their skills. To help them stay in work, you need decent work, decent pay, fair management, decent social setting where you're not having people coming over all prejudiced against you. Personal support sometimes is needed to help people, especially people with mental health problems or learning difficulties. Some of that is happening, desperately little. And to progress in work, we need stability of work, stability of homes, stability and effective transport, and stability of training opportunities for people in work, as well as people looking for work. Every single word on that page is relevant to Labour's policies. What's happening now? Compulsions, sanctions, welfare cuts. You can get some guidance from the Health and Work Programme and its successor programmes. We've looked at that and we've decided that they're not as good as they should be. The idea's okay, but it spoils. If you're in work and you want to earn a bit more and get on, there is a minimal amount of personal support available, and there's a minimum wage. Oh, remind me which government introduced that? Oh yes, I think I remember. But there are obligations and there are sanctions. You know, you can have your welfare payments cut if you don't increase the number of hours you work. What's that about? This is personal and psychological torture. Progress in work is just the same. Sanctions and obligations undermining personal support and the benefits of the minimum wage. And just in case you still have the tiniest kernel of belief in the power of sanctions to induce compliance, here's a report by those noted socialists, the Economic and Social Research Council, who said sanctions are counterproductive. They disengage people. They increase poverty and destitution. That some people move into crime in order to survive, and they make ill health and impairments worse. Their words, not mine. Their words. And that's only some of the evidence. When you do programs, great, let's have some programs that help people who need it. And some people do need it, but you've got to be careful what the program does. And time's going, I won't read all this. These are quotes about research into programs that made things worse for people who went on them. Now, this is my profession. I've been doing this all my life. I have a real difficulty here holding my head up about what I've been trying to achieve. Even more so when last month out came a report, and hidden in the middle of it was a well-intentioned, really good, well-intentioned program, one effect of which was to reduce the income of people who are out of work in Sheffield by £233 a year. Some of the other effects were great, like the people in work did really well. What was that about? We've got to work on these things, you know, and it takes a long-term commitment to research and study to try and find out why these contrary things are happening. Yeah. It ain't altogether straightforward. So I reckon that Labour could think about useful occupations for everybody. And by useful, I mean something benign, not some awful work fair where you're compelled to go and I don't know what. You know what I mean. It's decent occupation that is valuable to the person. We need to research. We need programs that last more than 2 years. We need personal choice involved and reliable welfare. We need to legislate for security and decent pay, for training, for representation, for support at work and support for the unions. The current government and its predecessors' policies, anti-worker policies, are harming the unemployed as well as the employed, and they're doing no good for the economy. And I think it goes as far as employment rights, home building, reasonable, cheap transport, access to training, fair taxation. All of these things make a difference to society, and they target that difference at the people who are at the wrong end of current policy. Things can be done by Labour. And I'm ending with some questions for people around the Labour Party generally and our leadership in particular. What is your policy on tax and welfare? How would you, dear Labour leader, score that question I asked you about sanctions? Would it be a 9 or a 1 or a 5? The evidence is there. Have you read it? Are you going to apply it? What about workplace representation and trade union activism? What about it? Why have we seen hostility to people being allowed to join picket lines against the most corrupt Tory government I've known in my lifetime? It's not the worst, but it's certainly the most corrupt. And what are you going to do next to create effective support for people who really need it? In other words, let's get away from this punish the poor version of something which is a good idea, which is helping the unemployed. I think Labour's got a long way to go on all of those questions. But for me, because it's my profession and because I'm a human being, they matter. It ain't complicated and it's not easy. It is about moral choices. There is good evidence, but make the wrong political choices and people suffer. Thank you. There's my email address. Do by all means get in touch. I love a good debate, and I'd be thrilled to hear from you about any of you. So I've gone far too long, Laurie. I'm really sorry. I said I wouldn't, and now I have. But thank you all very, very much for your patience.